Hi guys, I think it's time that we go out to the shop and we talk. We are going to have a little shop talk. Hey guys, welcome to Shop Talk. What Shop Talk is where we kind of take apart the scriptures, see how they were made, who they were talking to, why they were saying it, and see how that applies to us today. I really think that it's the way I operate in my shop. I don't know how to fix something until I know its intended use. I don't know how things work unless I take them apart. So that's what we're doing with Shop Talk. And you know, Dixie's making me a great looking pour over here. I love sitting down with a cup of coffee and reading the scriptures. I love seeing what the Lord wants to reveal to me, and I think it's just such a blessing. So let's get ready for some Shop Talk. Hey guys, welcome to Shop Talk. Hey, today you can tell we're not in the shop. We are actually in my camper. My wife and I are camping this weekend, but still wanted to jump in and kind of take a look at the scriptures. You can never take a vacation from the scriptures, right? Because it's life-giving. And don't you want to have life on your vacations? So today we're going to be looking at something a little different, but it's something that I always kind of wondered about. You know, when I was younger and I'd hear stories about the disciples and fishing, and then Jesus and the disciples fishing, and you can tend to maybe even put all of those stories together. So I'm going to look at a couple different stories. One at the very beginning of Jesus's ministry, and one right before he went up to heaven. So that was after his resurrection, and he was appearing to the disciples. So again, what we want to do is take a look at these things and look at who the author was writing to, what the author was really trying to convey, and what the people at that time and that culture were going through, so that we can relate to it, so that we can put that in context in our lives. So let's take a look. We're going to start in the Gospel of Luke. Now this is the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Now remember, Luke, he was not one of the original 12 disciples, right? But he was a Gentile, a person that was not a Jew. And he realized that Jesus came to save the Gentiles too, because Jesus told them. So he wanted to make sure all his friends knew about Jesus. So he was writing to a friend, Theophilus. So when you look at the book of Luke, he's writing to Theophilus. And he also authored Acts, all the stories in Acts. And he was writing to Theophilus there. So you got Luke. They call him the great physician. So he had a trade. He was doing things, but he got a hold of the love of Jesus in his life, and he wanted to share that. So he got his stories from the disciples and eyewitness people, and this is one of the stories that was told to him, probably by Peter. But in the beginning, in chapter 5 of Luke, in the beginning of Jesus' ministry, this is when he's first calling his disciples. But I want to make some correlations so that you guys can keep these two fishing stories separated. So, in Luke chapter 5, I'm going to start in verse 3 and kind of do this quickly, but there was a crowd around Jesus, and they crowded in to hear him, but they couldn't hear. So Jesus turned around, ask a couple fishermen, hey, would you push out so that the crowd can come up to the shore and that they could hear him? Because physicists say that actually being out in the water when it's not windy, that helps the sound, so Jesus could be heard by everybody. And hey, he's the Son of God, so I knew God had the right wind and the right setting for all of this to work out right. Plus, it was part of God's plan. It was part of Jesus' plan as he was calling specific disciples. Now, when you're reading this, allow that to soak in a little bit, because God has a purpose and a plan for your life. And he would go to this great lengths to help you and draw you. And many of you that are Christians, you know that. You know what God brought you out of. You know that day that God kind of drew you and things just made sense. It's hard to describe so that people who haven't experienced it understand it, but it is so good. So trust me on that. So I'm in Luke chapter 5. talking about Jesus drawing his disciples. So Jesus asked these guys, they turned around, said, sure, get in our boat. They were done fishing for the day. So in verse 3, he says, getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, now Simon Peter, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. So Simon Peter listened to Jesus teach. He was just experiencing Jesus for the first time. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into deep and let down your nets for a catch. Now, Simon Peter, he didn't know who Jesus was at this point. So he's listening. His interest is piqued. And Luke wants the Gentiles to know how the Jewish people responded to Jesus, how Jesus won over the Jewish people, because honestly, it was two different worlds that they were from. So they thought differently, and I'm sure that some of the Gentiles went, yeah, not all the Jewish people believe in Jesus. I don't know about this. But they were able to see historically how Peter was drawn to Jesus. So Jesus told him, hey, thanks for letting me use your boat. Basically, push out and throw out your net. They'd already been cleaning up their nets, so keep that in mind. And Simon answered, that's Simon Peter, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. But at your word I will let down the nets. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. So full, they had to have other guys come over and help them. Turns out Jesus drew some of them too. But Peter at that point realized who Jesus was. But Peter stepped out in faith first, okay? So I think it's important that we see that. Now, Jesus is calling guys that fish for a living. So this is no like Saturday morning, I'm going to sit by the lake, sure, I got nothing better to do. Peter was probably already put out by, okay, this rabbi wants to use my boat. I just want to go home. I've been fishing all night. I haven't caught anything. But he puts his personal preferences aside and does what Jesus asked him to do. Like, because you asked, I'll do it. I don't think we're going to catch anything. But he did. And that's what the Lord does to us. He wants to see us step out. And it proves our faith in him. And then Peter was revealed who Jesus was. So you go through the whole life of Jesus, right? We just went through our Easter, the Resurrection Sunday. We know the stories of that. And now Jesus was raised from the dead, and then he started appearing to the disciples again, which was pretty interesting because you would think he'd come back and go to the people that persecuted him, go to Rome, go to Pilate, and say, hey, I'm here. I told you guys, the Pharisees, I told you, but they weren't willing to listen. And Jesus knew that, so he doesn't force himself on people that don't listen. So I'm going to read a few more scriptures, but hang in there with me. This is a great story that I always used to get the two stories kind of put together. Like one happened on Saturday morning and then Saturday night. But it was the beginning of the ministry for Jesus and Simon Peter and the disciples, right? So now you got Jesus. He's raised from the dead. These disciples are still trying to figure out what's going on. So to set the scene, they say, hey, let's go fishing, right? So I'm in John. Now, John was one of the 12 disciples. John was the one that Jesus loved, and he loved telling people about it. So John loves these stories. So John, John in chapter 21, verse 2, Simon Peter. See, that's how we know that Simon he was talking about in Luke is Simon Peter. So Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and one of the sons of Zebedee is this John that's writing this, right? And two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I'm going to go fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Now, if you've ever gone fishing yourself or been around people that fish, that stinks. You know, when you're like, I don't know what else to do. I'm going to go fishing. It's a great place. I can gather my thoughts. But they probably were not on their game, right? They were thinking about Jesus and things. But they fished. They caught nothing. So that really deflates your day. It really does. So these guys are bumming, right? Verse 4, just as the day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet his disciples did not know that it was Jesus. We've never experienced somebody being resurrected from the dead. There's a lot of things going on. These guys are so distraught. And this guy's standing on the shore looking at them. You know, I would probably be thinking, great, he's going to ask me if I caught anything, and I'm going to say no. And he's like, well, don't you know how to fish? And then give me all these different advice on, well, this time of year, you want to use a very brightly colored lure, and you want to do this. Well, these guys are fishing with nets, but I'm sure that they thought, great, we're going to get an earful from somebody that knows how to do what we just had a bad night, and I don't really care about catching fish, right? But Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? Wow, he called them children. He called them basically his family, right? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. But get this, Peter already proved he did this back in Luke at the beginning of the ministry, right? So they cast it. They didn't hesitate this time. Peter didn't push back. He's like, you know what? We've been here. We're going to cast it on the other side of the boat. Good things happen when you obey, right? And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. It was an amazing catch. And if I can only relate that to one bite, which is a blast. About when you're ready to give up and you start reeling in that bobber and a fish hits that worm and bam, when you're ready to go and you caught something, nothing feels better, right? That disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John's way of saying, yeah, he loved me the best, therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. Okay, there's some cool things going on there. John recognized Jesus, and Peter recognized that John recognized Jesus, and everything came together for Peter. It like shook him out of his whatever he was thinking. And can't we do that? We can go through life with so many things on our mind and the burdens and the things, and you just wish that something would change, but you're so caught up in yourself that you miss God speaking to you. Well, it's good buddy John recognizes, hey, that's Jesus. And Peter didn't bat an eye. Remember, Peter was the one, he stepped out on the water one time, and he started walking on water towards Jesus. I don't know if he was walking on the water, but he jumped into the sea, and I don't think he cared. He wanted to get to Jesus. Think about that. Think about loving Jesus so much that you wouldn't even wait for the boat to get there. You would put up with the discomfort of being wet. You would just get to Jesus. Because the other disciples, it says, came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. That fish that they caught was income. Peter was willing to throw everything away just to be with Jesus. And it's a beautiful sight. And I've experienced this when you're going through life and you just feel like, man, nothing is working. Nothing is going my way in life. But then you realize that Jesus died for you, and even though nothing's working today, right now, and it feels like the world's against you, you have a God that's for you, that you get to spend eternity in heaven with him. So even on your worst day, it is better than a day that somebody that doesn't know Jesus is having, right? Because all this stuff isn't going to matter after a while. And Peter knew that. He jumped in. So, verse 9. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid on it and bread. Jesus was already cooking. He already knew his friends were coming. He already had the fire going, right? Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So I look at that even like a tithe. Before they sold any of that fish, they offered it to Jesus. They're like, hey, they caught 100 fish, so they brought 10 fish in. And God's multiplication in their life is a blessing back to God, right? Okay, it's so cool. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish. So Peter, he didn't just look back at the guys and say, hey, you lazy dry guys, you go ahead and pull those fish in. I'm going to hang out by Jesus. He's like, he obeyed Jesus there too. Jesus said, get some fish. Peter said, wow, I'll get some fish. He loved giving to Jesus. 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not... So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, and it was full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. That's a miracle in itself, that you can't even contain the Lord's blessing. I think that's in the Bible too. We'll get to that someday. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now Jesus is blessing them. Now none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? Now you got to be like, John said he was Jesus. Peter got so excited he jumped out of the boat. The other disciples are like, pretty sure this is Jesus and this story sounds familiar, but he died and he was resurrected, and they had to just be going crazy, right? They knew it was the Lord. They just know it. And when sometimes you're around people that know Jesus and love Jesus, you just know that the Lord is near, right? Have you felt that? Or you just have a calm or a peace about you that you can't explain for a time that you shouldn't have. You just know the Lord's around you. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. So Jesus gave them what they gave him, but he blessed it, right? This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Wow! So you think they would have known him. All those questions are going through your mind, but don't lose sight of the big picture. Jesus started his ministry with Simon Peter with fishing, because that's who Jesus was. Jesus uses who we are, and he uses that. And right before Jesus gave them their ministries and he went off into heaven and they're trying to figure things out, they went fishing because that's who they were. That's who Simon Peter was. And Jesus used that time to speak to him, and he let him eat of the harvest. So that's the difference right now that you're seeing, is Peter's going to go live off the harvest that the Lord has prepped for him. He's going to go start churches. He's going to start doing things. And then you see Luke became friends with Paul. Paul the apostle, he was a Jewish Gentile, but Luke was a Gentile. And he was telling all of his friends about the stories of Jesus. And it mattered to Luke how Jesus interacted with the Jewish people, his Jewish friends. Because I think he's building bridges there. He's building, there's relationship, there's community, and Jesus modeled how we ought to live, even through all of that. And what I love is, Jesus was not in a hurry. Did you notice that? Jesus, if I would have been in those shoes, I don't know. I might have hey guys, I don't want you to fish all night with not catching anything. I'll wave a light or whatever, come on over. But no, Jesus waited. He let them get to a point where it didn't make sense for them to obey, and they obeyed. It didn't make sense for them to see him, and they didn't quite understand, I guess is what I'm saying, who he was. But they still, if it's like Jesus, I want to be drawn to it, and I'm going to do it. So this week, I pray that you guys look for Jesus in places that you hadn't seen Jesus. Now, Jesus, that he comes into our heart. We sang as kids and things. The Holy Spirit comes in and dwells in us when we accept Jesus as our Savior. He doesn't push himself on anybody that doesn't want him, right? So I want you this week to look around you, to be around other people that believe in Jesus, and look for the Jesus in them. look for the Jesus in you, and walk your life in that calm confidence that Jesus had, right? Because let things play out so that you're in the will of God. I always say that I used to like try to pick up the reins and to drive my own wagon. You could tell I watched a lot of Westerns as a kid. And you drop the reins and the horses kind of go where they're going. But it's kind of like you're a little kid and Jesus is sitting right next to you on the buckboard, and he's got the reins, and you go, no, I want those. And you start yanking and fighting Jesus for the reins, you'll end up in the ditch somewhere, right? But if you ride along with Jesus and actually he gives you the reins where he wants you to have the reins, your life will be so much better. So as you're going through this week, look for the Jesus around you, and look for those opportunities where you can go, you know what, Lord, I really don't have control of this, and I'm going to give it to you. The disciples, they don't really have control of this. I don't know what to do. Let's go fishing. Stay true to who you are, and because God created you as who you are. And once you get through a situation, look back and see if Jesus was the one standing on the seashore going, hey, I got some fish. Come on in. I love you guys, and I love the God we serve. I hope you've enjoyed these. If you did, give us a thumbs up on this little episode. Consider subscribing. We're just blessed to have the Shop Talk family. You take care now. Bye.